Hello and welcome to Q Primary Presents Intentional Tech. I am your host, Kayla Harlow, a former first grade teacher, ed tech advocate, yet limited screen time parent. Today's episode is going to focus on how to make formative assessments engaging for our young learners by utilizing technology. Our guest today is Monica Burns, founder of ClassTechTips.com and the Easy EdTech podcast. Monica is an EdTech and curriculum consultant, author of EdTech Essentials, and former New York City public school teacher. She works with schools and organizations around the world to support TK through 20 educators with thoughtful technology integration. Monica's website, ClassTechTips.com, and her Easy EdTech podcast helps support educators and encourages them to place tasks before apps by promoting deeper learning with technology. So without further ado, hi, Monica. Thanks for coming on today. We are so excited to really jump into your expertise when it comes to creating engaging formative assessments. And can you start off and explain what your current role in education is, along with a little bit of your background?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for the invitation to come on and chat with you today. I'm a former New York City public school teacher, and I've been out of the classroom for several years now, running my blog, ClassTechTips.com, writing about EdTech, like my book, EdTech Essentials, and speaking and visiting schools, organizations, conferences, primarily here in the United States, a couple international spots too, but helping think about thoughtful, intentional technology integration, what that looks like across different grade levels and different content areas, and making choices that really set students up for success, both in the short and long term with technology integration.
You have a couple really awesome tools, books published, and kind of cheat sheets, if you will, to really streamline that technology, which is appreciated when it's such an overwhelming industry right now for educators. So, what motivated you to originally delve into the ed tech world?
Well, I started off my teaching career in an elementary classroom with an overhead projector and a chalk and a chalkboard, right? And all those great things. And
Yes.
so transitioned into an environment where we became a magnet school. So we received funding for a whole bunch of things, including technology. And we weren't the first school to get iPads, but we were pretty early on, and early on in New York City, at least too. And so that, we had this opportunity, the possibilities were starting to bubble up, right, of what we could do with these different tools and resources. And as I started diving in, I always, leaned a little bit more to things that were techie just in my personal life and trying to integrate things into my classroom. But that's really where the big jump took place. So I started being asked to speak and share about some of the things that were happening in my classroom. And that led to me getting a better answer to the question I was starting to get 10 years ago, which was, what's your blog? And can we follow you on Twitter? And all these things that, if you asked me in early 2012, I didn't have an answer to, but by halfway through that year, I started, ClassTechTips.com, and it's been 10 years now of all that sharing. So what really prompted me to get into this space of ed tech was seeing what was possible with my group of students and realizing that there was a lot of just hunger for more
Yeah.
conversations, more resources, more what can we do? What do we do with these devices? And even though I had such a wonderful school community and colleagues, I felt a little on my own with the tech integration piece, which I
Mhm.
know many people still feel that way. Whatever that thing is they're passionate about, they want to go out and find that community. And that's really what happened for me with the learning and sharing going side by side still today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know it's appreciated because educators, like we said, are really overwhelmed with what's out there. So having a streamlined avenue to go and get those tips is awesome. And I completely agree with you. I was kind of the same way where the idea of ed tech was great, but we were kind of left on our own to navigate that and trial and error it. And seeing the kids have the ability to expand outside the four walls of the classroom, if you will, is truly empowering, not only for the educators, but the students as well. So, if you could, talking about overwhelm again, if you could only use 3 tech resources with the little ones in regards to formative assessment, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So when it comes to picking tools, like you said, there is a lot out there. And when giving recommendations, I always like to start with the embrace your place, right? If you're
Mhm.
being asked to use a learning management system, if there's great resources in your school to help support you with a new tool or resource, like go for those first because there's the community there around you and an expectation too, around using certain things. That being said, with formative assessment, there's a few that are top of my list for our youngest learners. Seesaw is an absolute favorite. I was just at the ISTE conference and had a chance to connect or reconnect, I should say, with some of their team. I love that because there's different layers that kids can interact with. So they can present information in response to a prompt with a drawing, with their voice, jumping on camera, snapping a picture of a drawing or something they did on paper, which I think is important, right? So capturing those analog experiences and talking about it. So the collection of formative assessment data with Seesaw, I think, is really fantastic. But also the teacher side of things, setting up activities, assigning different prompts to different students. So the differentiation, even with facilitating formative assessment, is really great there. And you can leave voice comments, emojis, right? So there's a lot of layers
Yes.
in Seesaw that I think it makes it a really powerful one for this age group. Second one on my list would be Microsoft Flip, formerly Flipgrid, which I
Oh,
know is
yes. I
great.
saw they just
Mhm.
announced that they were rebranding, if you will. And I'm not very familiar with it. So I'm excited to
Yeah.
hear.
It's one of those things that I don't know how long it'll take me, to make the switch when someone changes a name. But the great thing is that all the core functionality and the way that kids interact with the tool remains the same. So sometimes when there's a rebrand, we get that oh no moment of
Yeah.
how it's going to look like to reintroduce to a group of students, but still super friendly. Just flip instead of Flipgrid, I guess, is the new big thing. So with that one, I love it for formative assessment, really of all ages, but especially with you can allow them some flexibility and creativity in their responses, but plenty of structure too that could allow you to build a routine. So you might not use Flipgrid every day. If you have lots of opportunities for turn and talks, right? Get kids talking to each
Yes.
other, of course. But if you want to capture student responses that may feel more asynchronous, and I don't necessarily mean remote learning from home, but blended learning station rotation,
Mhm.
or by the end of this week, share a video of your favorite book that we've read together. And there's a pod in the classroom where kids can go in and
Yeah.
record their
More of an
30-second video.
independent idea. Yeah.
You
Very good.
bet. Right. If we're all together, a whole class, I think there's different ways to facilitate discussions that are valuable, but this is great for individual students. And you can really set up as a teacher some templates so you can repurpose like a prompt or a structure, have certain things open up for just a week, and then the next one opens up, right?
Mhm.
So, from a logistical side, it's really great for building routines for students and coming back to something that you might not use every day, but you might use weekly. And the third one I would put on the list is Book Creator. I've done a lot
Yes.
of work with their team and love that as a tool. And from a formative assessment piece, of course, you could make a poetry anthology or some wonderful culminating projects, but I love it for journals. As an elementary teacher, I'm sure many other people who've been in this role for a while, right, could um, would have a similar experience, but I just remember the days of having piles of marble notebooks or composition
Yes.
notebooks and the
Yes.
kids going to lunch and me hoping that they put their pencil as a bookmark or the sticky note or whatever it was so that
Mhm.
I could find their last reading response, right? With Book Creator, you can do digital journals. So kids can add a new page every day or however the cadence looks like in a classroom. And then you as a teacher can open up your dashboard and see everyone's work in real time. So you can give voice comments, video comments, and feedback, and kids have lots of options for updating their journal. So again, not necessarily a replacement for writing out sentences or sharing things in other ways, but the value add, right, or the big benefits here are around the logistical component, the ease and efficiency, which is not just saving teachers time, although I think that's very important and
Yes.
wonderful, right? The other part of it too is that you're really hearing from everyone. So your efficiency and your ability to give more thoughtful, regular feedback to a group is definitely elevated in a way that just might not be possible with that sticky note that goes who knows where when you hand, right, the
That
composition
grading
notebook back.
pile that goes home and back and home and back.
Mhm.
Yeah, I completely agree. And with all three of those resources, the digital documentation, whether the work is done digitally or not, like I am a proponent on Seesaw of taking pictures of actual writing or their actual work, but you still have that digital documentation to mark growth if you need it for SSTs or IEP meetings, and for students to self-assess as well. So I agree with all three of those. I need to spend more time with Flip, not Flipgrid,
Mhm.
and get more familiar with it. But I appreciate those recommendations, and we will have show notes available that will have direct links and examples of those three programs. So, for tech weary educators, what is one thing that an educator can do tomorrow to put one of these formative assessment ideas to work and to give them confidence that these young learners do have the capability to do this asynchronous or independent type of formative assessment in a
Mhm.
digital space? Loaded question, but
Big question, right? Well, I was just in Texas last week working with a group of educators in Dallas, very toasty for summertime, of course.
yes.
But one of the things I said to this group, and I often say, especially when I'm giving, say, like an hour concurrent session at a
Mhm.
conference, right? Or something that has a number in the title, like this many ways or this many things,
Yes.
is I usually start off by saying, don't do all of the things.
Mhm.
Like, I'm going to tell you all these things, but don't do all of them, right? Choose one or two to take back this week, try something out later this month. And I think the same thing goes along with your question is to keep it simple, right? We have to clear out some of the noise and focus in on the one thing that we want to add to our tool belt, that we want to build into a routine, that we won't want both ourselves as educators and students to have the capacity to really thrive in that space. So, with the three tools we just looked at, I think they absolutely fall into this category of having flexibility, being able to come back to multiple times, and the ability to build a routine around them. So that's usually what I'm suggesting, whether it's an open ended creation tool for maybe more summative assessment or a culminating project, or a formative assessment strategy where we can do an update once a week in Flipgrid, or every time you get to this station, you snap a picture and add it to Seesaw. So if someone's looking to do something tomorrow, right, or put one thing into action, I would say choose a tool and a routine that you can stick with, something
Yes.
that's attainable. And maybe there's an aspirational aspect that you'll revisit once that becomes part of your regular system in your groups.
I completely agree. And what I have, or the message I send is the same thing, that if you try and do everything, you're not going to do anything very well. So pick
Mhm.
one thing to master and then build off of that. And I keep hearing you go back to the idea of templates or repurposing
Yeah.
what you're doing. And I completely agree. If you have a structured routine and open ended templates that the kids know what is expected of them in regards to
Mhm.
formative assessment or reflection, then you remove the need to give them a lot of direction because they know what to do. And that creates room for creativity and expression. If you want any of these free resources or tech tips, make sure to go to classtechtips.com. Monica has an awesome podcast. How often does your podcast release?
Every Tuesday for just about 3 years now with a couple Sunday bonus episodes. It's called the Easy Ed Tech Podcast. It's on all the podcast apps, but you can also press play from the blog, especially if you're new to podcasts, or that's a better way to listen.
Yes, and I will link to the blog and those podcast episodes because what I really like are the show notes and
Mhm.
all of the resources that you recommend are all linked directly there. So there's a plethora of things to go back on. I would recommend subscribing to Monica's podcast, the Easy Ed Tech podcast, right? And thank you, Monica, for coming on today. And I look forward to continuing the conversation throughout the years.
Thank you so much for having me.
All resources mentioned in today's episode can be found at littledigitalearners.com/podcast, and make sure to grab your free virtual word wall at littledigitalearners.com/wordwall. Also, be sure to head over to q.org to join the new community where you can connect with like-minded educators and receive free professional development resources. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. Resources can be found at littledigitalearners.com/podcast, and be sure to subscribe, like, or follow. And always remember, technology is